Welcome to the Picture This Photography podcast, prepared to be inspired to take a bunch of pictures, because today Tony and I are going to be talking about Gordon Parks, and more specifically, the things we learned about his career that we think will inspire you to take more pictures.
There's two takes on this. You can learn about Gordon Parks, but you can also learn from Gordon Parks. And I always try to figure out what I can do to improve my photography based on this person's incredible lifetime of success. And we have real important tips. First, a word from our sponsor, Squarespace.
Whether you need your own website or portfolio or a store for your merch, or maybe just a keyword protected space on your website so your clients can check out their photos, you can make that happen with Squarespace, and you can make it happen free today because they have a 14-day free trial, no credit card needed. And when you decide you want to buy it, and I know you will, go to the link in the description down below. It's squarespace.com/Chelsea and use the coupon code Chelsea to get 10% off. So, who is Gordon Parks? If you're not familiar with him, we do have another podcast more generally covering his life and his work. But basically, he was born in Kansas. He's African American and was the first African American photographer for Life magazine and Vogue. He literally saved someone's life with his photography. He directed the movie Shaft from the 70s. He has made several films and is a writer. He is a Renaissance man, and he is a delight. So you're going to love to learn more about him.
Chelsea, you've read so much about his career. Like, what's the first lesson that people should be inspired by?
I think that the biggest overarching lesson would be to shoot with purpose. Gordon Parks called his camera his weapon of choice because he used it to show the truth, right? He used it to fight injustice. And that was really his bigger purpose in his photography and his creative work. And I don't think you need to be Gordon Parks and necessarily have, you know, a huge purpose like taking on injustice, but just shooting with any amount of purpose, I think, helps put meaning into your photos. Gordon Parks worked for Life magazine, like I was talking about, and he decided that he wanted to cover gangs in Harlem because there were a lot of teenagers and gangs and there were a lot of problems. So he went to Life and he asked if he could take photos of them. He rode with one of the head gangsters for a week, driving him around before he even asked to take pictures. He just hung out. And then he spent 4 weeks with them documenting what it's like to be in a gang. The kid's name was Red Jackson. He was only 17 years old. He said that he got tired of getting beat up all the time by older kids, so he formed the gang for some kind of protection. Gordon Parks really hoped that when people saw pictures of Red, they would see him as a person instead of just a criminal. He took pictures of Red at home with his family, doing chores, carrying kids in parades on his shoulders. Red organized sports games for kids in the neighborhood. He really made a community, which is not something you think of when you think of a gang, right? But he also showed the gritty side, like a kid that was murdered by a rival gang, fights that happened that Red got into. And so he really wanted to honestly cover Red as a person. And he hoped that when he unveiled that, you know, Red was a kid, people would see that, you know, not all kids in gangs are bad kids. They're in bad circumstances and they might need community support and programs. So that was like a huge, powerful story in life. And that story touched people so much that they actually like reached out to Red and made him a spokesman for, you know, leaving a life of gang violence behind and instead helping the community. So it did actually reach people.
And when you look at Gordon Parks' entire life, you see his purpose throughout it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we look at it through a very selective lens where we see his greatest hits of all time. And I know for me, I want my work to have purpose, but often I have a hard time finding that purpose, or I just can't seem to make it happen. And that can feel really demoralizing if you're a person who wants to have purpose. So I want to bring up the point that often his work didn't directly serve these big goals. Not every picture he took was some life-changing things. Like before he went to work for Life magazine, he was shooting pretty mundane stuff. He was the working photographer. But he was developing these skills. And even when he started working for Life magazine, they just had him taking pictures of like some women in nice dresses and doing the usual travel photography stuff, like, oh, go profile this other country. And it didn't tie in with what he would be remembered by, but they were still steps to his ultimate goal. And he would not have been able to become the Gordon Parks that we know without going through those mundane things, because they would develop skills, made contacts. It was important too. So as a photographer, know that even if you aren't doing some super meaningful thing, it's still a step along your path.
Yeah, and I think just having a purpose drives you to take pictures in the first place.
I want to ask you, Chelsea, do you think it was talent or skill that made Gordon Parks who he was? And let me clarify, because I am not a fan of the word talent, really, because to me, talent is something that you're born with, and skill is something that you develop. And so many beginning photographers I see feel demoralized when things don't work out, when their pictures aren't amazing immediately, because they think, oh, I'm not talented like Gordon Parks. How much of this was talent versus skill?
I think he had both. I think he started with innate talent. When he got his first camera, he bought it from a thrift store. He went and developed his first roll of film at a Kodak shack, and the guy working there said, "Who took these photos?" He was impressed. And he told young Gordon Parks, if you want to have an exhibit here, you can share your photos. And this was a person that was looking at photos all day. So I do think that he had an innate talent, but he also had an incredible drive. He said that he knew he wanted to be someone. And he was a person that was constantly working on something new, constantly gigging, constantly getting jobs. So I think that he also developed it as a skill and worked very hard in practice. I think it was a combination.
Well, I'll say when I went through Ansel Adams' early work, not impressive, honestly. And that people will think that's being insulting, but I think of it as the opposite. Like, Ansel Adams started out as a beginning photographer, taking mediocre pictures, but he continued to take pictures. This is every great photographer's story. And I kind of saw the same thing with Gordon Parks. His early work was not noteworthy. And when you look at his most famous photos, most of them are taken starting with the late 40s, but early 40s, you don't see a lot of that work. I am certain someone told him that his work was good. And that is something that most great photographers have in common too, is they had some early amount of encouragement.
Yeah.
And that is enough to make them feel like they can do it. Sometimes you just have to make someone think that they do have talent, even if they don't, because what they lack in talent, they will then make up for in skill, and they just need that little bit of encouragement. And I think the lesson here is, don't let somebody else's amazing lifetime of work discourage you from progressing your skills because you don't get it right away. Like Gordon Parks didn't get it right away. Ansel Adams didn't get it right away. It happened after decades, and they never stopped improving.
Yeah, you can't compare yourself in year 1 as a photographer to Gordon Parks in year 40 as a photographer. You have to understand that even if you just have a little bit of talent to begin with, or even if you're the most talented person to begin with, you have to put in the work and get the experience. It really does take practice.
Yeah, talent can propel you, but lack of talent should never hold you back.
No, if you're not feeling like you're the best right now, that's fine. That just means you have a lot of things to learn. And like when I look at my pictures even from 5 years ago, I'm like, oh, I would do that differently. If you're not disappointed with your pictures from, a few years ago, it means you're not growing. So it's okay.
And also, when you encounter a new photographer, encourage them.
Yeah.
Even if you think they're not Gordon Parks, tell them this is amazing, because that is often all it takes to propel someone into a full career. We're educators. We've been around long enough to see people go from absolute beginners to amazing photographers.
Yeah.
And often it's that first little spark. Okay, no matter where you are in career, you should set up a website where you can show off your work, because showing the world your skill or talent is important. The best way to do that is to go to squarespace.com/Chelsea. There you can drag your pictures in and make them look beautiful. You can set up a page where clients can schedule an appointment and put down a deposit, or really sell any other type of product. And then you can look at detailed analytics, see who is visiting your site, how long they're staying, so then you can go back and make your site even better. Don't trust me, just go check it out for yourself at squarespace.com/Chelsea. Free trial. If you love it, use the coupon code Chelsea and get 10% off.
Okay, here's something I really relate to with Gordon Parks, and I think it's a very helpful lesson, and it's a fun lesson too. Gordon Parks was multi-talented, and I think
Multi-skilled.
multi-skilled and multi-talented. Oh my gosh, over here. You see what I'm dealing with, people? He played piano. He directed films. He made films. He wrote the scores to his films. He wrote books. He wrote poetry. He wrote instructional photography books.
Wow.
We might have been competing with him if we had been in a different generation. But he did it all. And I can relate to that because I play the piano. And when I'm feeling uninspired on the piano, I mean, if I'm feeling uninspired taking pictures and I go play the piano, it's like I can relax about my pictures. That creativity starts flowing. You know, sometimes a sad song I'm playing, I'll say, I kind of want to make a sad picture now and kind of mesh these two together. And that's what Gordon Parks did. So he actually started as a pianist. His mom brought a piano into the family home. He was the youngest of 15. He never got proper piano lessons, but he just kind of taught himself how to play, never learned how to formally read or write music. And yet he was composing his own music and getting it on the radio when he was just a young man. Another time he'd be taking pictures for Life magazine and he'd put his poetry with it. And so he always had his multi-talents and his multi-skills, his multi-interests, if you will, supporting one another. There are great ways for photographers to do that. If you love cars, take car photos. Who better to take photos of something than someone passionate, right? If you're a musician, you could make a photo that you think would represent your favorite song, or maybe make an album cover for your favorite artist or for yourself. So think of ways that you can blend your talents and your interests, and it's going to improve your photography.
Yeah, creators create. They'll take pictures, they'll write. Before I had a camera, I was writing, and when I was a kid, I was drawing all the time. And if you have that spark in you, then it can be let out in so many different ways, and it cross-pollinates, right?
Yes, and you don't have to be good at the other stuff. Like, I write the worst poetry, really, truly not good at it. I'm not being modest. I'm not a good poet. But often my poetry inspires my pictures. And I say, well, my writing, it's not so strong that I want to share it, but I can put the same concept in a photo. And that's when I end up with a lot of my, like, more metaphorical photos. So they definitely influence each other.
Yeah, Gordon Parks was not known for his writing. He wrote a bunch of books, but none of it in itself became historically noteworthy.
Yeah.
It was the photos that really spoke to people. But even when he was working for Life, everybody remembers his photos from his most important stories, but nobody remembers what the writer wrote. Like, he always had a writer with him, side by side.
He was a star.
But the photos themselves, especially in that time, conveyed so much more meaning.
Yeah.
You know, before there were cameras, obviously, it was the writer who would have been the star.
Yeah.
Photography is important.
Maybe he would have worked on writing more if that was the case, because he was a good writer,
He would have been a great writer.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a question, and it's going to be difficult.
Oh, gosh.
Could
wow.
or would a white man have taken those same photos with that same meaning?
I don't think any other person could have taken those same photos with that same meaning, because Gordon Parks had his own perspective. I want to tell you a Gordon Parks story. When he was a teenager, a group of white teenagers threw him into a river thinking he couldn't swim to try to kill him. And he was smart enough to just stay underwater and, you know, swim to the edge without them seeing him because he didn't want them to kill him.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an experience that maybe most people have had. And so he had this perspective where he was, I think, sympathetic or empathetic to other people's experiences, you know. The story I was talking about where he followed the gangs, he almost had to be in a gang. He was homeless when he was 16. He said he thought about turning to a life of crime, but then he had other opportunities come up. He played piano in a brothel, he bartended, he traveled with a jazz band, you know. But he understood that could have been him. He wasn't coming into this gang with judgment. He hung out with them. He wanted to see them before he took pictures of them. He wanted to understand them. And his specific experiences informed his voice, and he was able to share other people's experiences because of it. So no, I don't think, I definitely don't think that a white person or any person could have taken his pictures.
Yeah, there's a lot written about the challenges he faced being a person of color, photographing people in the 40s, 50s, 60s. That was something literally nobody had done before. He was the first to do this. But while that was definitely a challenge for him, he also brought his unique perspective and his ability to relate to people on a different level.
Yeah.
And when people saw his important works, the photos stand out from everything else. Like, you've never seen that before because he had a different take on it, because he was like the first person to do that. And I think there is a lesson there. Like, as a photographer, you will face certain challenges, but at the same time, if you overcome those challenges, then you will have a slightly different story to tell, and there will be a unique piece to what you create.
Yeah, I also think it's important to realize that you, as a photographer, you as an individual will always have your own voice. And I think it's cool when people recreate photos. I do that sometimes, but I really, really want you to go out and just take pictures seeing the world from your own perspective, whatever that may be. Because that's how your photos are going to be unique, by sharing what you see, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think those are all inspiring, but the last lesson that I have, I think, is maybe the biggest takeaway I had from Gordon Parks' career, and that is that kindness ages well. Those photos that he took a whole series on crime where he was like very empathetic to the victims. He took he followed around gangsters and he really humanized them. And all of it seems very modern. The stories seem very modern. His perspective seems really modern. You said that you saw like a bunch of interviews where people all just like loved him and said he was a great guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody, they repeatedly said he would pick up the phone for them.
Yeah.
If they said, I want to ask you some questions, can we have coffee? He would do it. The only thing they said was never call him before 2 p.m. because he was not a morning person at all. But if it was 10 p.m., he'd be there for you. And I think there's a real important lesson in that, is that photographers, we have to connect as people. And you have to maintain those relationships. They're really important. And that's definitely something I could be better at. I'm not great at staying in communication with people.
I noticed that.
So I will try to be better at that in the future and learn from Gordon Parks.
Yeah, and my takeaway was that if you are living your life with this purpose to be kind and to make the world a better place, if you're taking pictures from this perspective that you want to use your skills and talents to help others, I think that when you get to the end of your career, that's going to be the stuff that you're really proud of. And when I see that Gordon Parks helped these kids, there was a boy, Flavio, in Brazil who had asthma, and he was living, the way he was living was really terrible. He documented it. He moved people so much that they funded for this boy in Brazil to come to the United States to get a surgery that saved his life. That is the boy that Gordon Parks saved. He could have not cared. He could have just gotten the picture and moved on with his life and not cared, but he really wanted to follow this boy and show people that people were suffering. And that kindness is what people remember when they look back on his career, these big stories of him helping others. And so it really made me think. I won't push my philosophy on you, but this made me think, I want to be like that. I want to look back one day and think, I help people, Yeah. Yeah.
Gordon Parks figured out something in the 40s that a lot of photographers in 2021 haven't figured out. And I think that's the importance of telling your own story. I hear people time and time again, they don't want to be in the photos. They don't want it to be about themselves. They feel insecure making a web page about themselves or writing their own bio in the first person. Gordon Parks literally wrote an autobiography of himself and then published it as a movie.
Yeah.
And he constantly told his own story. And his photos are famous largely because they were taken by Gordon Parks. Any one of those photos, good photos.
Yeah.
But if it was taken by somebody you didn't know, it wouldn't be important. There's a little bit of you in every photo, and the people who view your photos care about you and your story, and they also need to know that about you. So if you're the type of person who's afraid to open up and share your story, you have to get over that, or it will hold back your career. It's not narcissism to let people in. It's being open. And that is the way you will be able to advance your career. That is why Gordon Parks insisted on getting a byline in the early 1940s when he was working at an all-black newspaper, because he got a byline, he got a little bit of credit. Now he could have a little bit more leverage with models or getting into locations. And by making himself a little bit famous, his work got a little bit better. And he ended up being a star. Like in the 60s and 70s, he was a household name. He literally directed Shaft. That's how famous this guy was. And that's the reason that we're talking about him now. If he'd been shy about opening up, we probably wouldn't know who he was.
Yeah, I think he was really intelligent about that too. He knew that he had to take pictures of the day's top stars and do this fashion photography, and then he used his clout to help other people, and he had this really interesting balanced career of like glam and glitz. I think he hung out with Gloria Vanderbilt or something.
Mm-hmm.
He was hanging with like the famous people, but then he was also still contacting the boy Flavio in Brazil and keeping up with him. And so he kept grounded. He kept a foot in each camp and used one to help the other.
Now, if you want to be a storyteller, it's important for you to have a loud voice.
Yeah.
And sometimes that requires making yourself a little bit of a celebrity.
Yeah.
Well, one way to make yourself famous is to show off your work. And the best way to do that is with a Squarespace website, because you don't then have to be a designer. You just have to take some great photos, make a bio page, put your picture there, tell your own story, and show it off to the world. If you're interested in this, go to squarespace.com/Chelsea. Set it up, no credit card required. And then if you love it, use the coupon code Chelsea to get 10% off. In the comments down below, I'd love to hear people's thoughts on Gordon Parks' life and career and what it's meant to you. And what lessons can we learn from Gordon Parks? And did he do anything wrong?
Don't you dare. He did nothing wrong. Okay. Thank you so much. If you want to see more podcasts, we have like 130 or something. You can go to our podcast playlist on our YouTube channel, or you can just subscribe to our podcast anywhere podcasts are available. It's called the Picture This Photography Podcast. And stay tuned because we'll have another episode out in like 2 weeks. Thanks.
Thanks.